Hello, hello, everybody.
Hello.
We're back.
Back in action.
Calling in from
The,
the lair.
the month of October continues. We're on our last little stint here of the awareness training month, or week 4, I believe we're into now.
Yeah, I think so.
Another passionate topic of ours to cover today. That's like one of those ring the bell ones that we cover a lot on, which should be exciting, is the good old joys of boring software patching. How does it relate to cybersecurity? Why does it suck, but it's so important? And yeah, lots of good content I'm sure we can cover.
So important to note, Derek.
Yes.
We have been following the CISA theme for Cybersecurity Awareness Month, right? And so software updating patching is the fourth fundamental. And so this is good. So it's not that boring. They think it's cool. We think it's cool.
It's boring if you have to do it. How about that?
If you have to do
Server
it,
admins don't like it.
I'll buy that. I'll buy that.
But if you tell somebody else, like, hey, go do it, sure, it's fun.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Report back when
you have
it's
1,000 servers to patch, you're not going to have a good time.
Yeah, hit your SLAs.
Been there, done that. So yes, I can relate directly to that.
Our big fix.
Especially getting just downtime, right? I mean, we can kind of start there. I mean, companies want to stay up 24/7, right? So how do we patch to take things down? That's a great maybe starting point we can dive into and what that looks like, right? So it's one of those technical controls that gets kind of overrun by the business control that says, hey, go do this, but then they won't give you time to go patch. So maybe
so when do you do it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you almost have to kind of like make time, right? The business has to make a decision. What's more important, and I could spend a whole episode on this, which I won't get into, but why your apps shouldn't be so dependent on like one or two things that you can't take down. That's definitely a problem. I've seen that happen many, many times before. I'll share you guys a quick story. I had a scenario one time where, same thing. I was told to upgrade something, and I never got an outage window. Ever. Just like, hey, like you can't take this thing down. But I always knew that every few months, this certain zone in the network would break or crash. And what I did was I had the next device kind of ready to go, stage on the new code. So next time it broke, instead of me fixing it, I actually just cut it over to the other one, and that solved the problem. But yeah, very, very bad decision. Shouldn't do that. The business needs to take patching and software updates, I think, seriously. The good and/or bad news is this stuff is so relevant in the news now. I think CISOs and boards are kind of almost mandating, like, hey, we have to do this as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a core fundamental. When we do our program assessments here with Triden Group, that's one of the things that we really hit on is, what is your patching schedule? How are you handling not only asset management but asset discovery? And I would include software, right, as part of that discovery process.
That's a big one.
Yeah, which I'm sure
you can't patch if you don't know what you have.
100%.
You just stole my line.
I can't
find it, you can't fix it. Right? So. Yeah. Derek beat us to the punch.
Well, then not only that,
you're absolutely right.
But if you don't know the criticality or the dependencies associated with the system, that's another part of it too, right? So, that even takes a little bit of triage.
I would see this quite a bit with infrastructure. When you start dealing with SCADA, and water utilities or power grids, there is such a reluctancy to take it down, right? Because the number one need is availability, to your point.
Right.
And what we end up with is a whole heck of a lot of legacy hardware because they're never gonna take it down especially if it's not broken. So that window that you leveraged, Derek, often never presents itself. But yeah, we would see that quite a bit in the FBI that utilities are dealing with 20 and 30-year-old hardware systems for this very reason. They're just not gonna ever take it down to upgrade. Plus, they can't afford any type of redundancy, right? So there's not any backup resiliency, as it were. But yeah. took us a little bit sideways there. I know we're not talking about infrastructure, but
it's perfect
still,
though.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
Well, in that specific scenario too, it's so tough because in a little bit more modern environment, you can use virtualization to replicate the environment and then test. Whereas in that scenario, it's far more difficult to replicate all that legacy hardware and then test before you actually roll these things out. So the risk is even higher.
Great point.
Yeah. So definitely.
If you kind of take two different companies, right? If we say like we have a healthcare company that has tons of IoT devices, pumps, Care Fusion type stuff, heart monitors, legacy gear, thousands of switches and routers and thousands of servers, that's one thing. Now you have like a maybe born in the cloud DevOps kind of built, e-commerce company. Essentially, one company can basically break things, turn things off and on, and you probably would never know. The other, man, you're going to know real quick if something breaks. So it's almost like you have this, conflict battle of like to patch or not to patch. In some cases, where in some industries, they make it very easy or more so easy to go patch. So it's very valid points on the industry you're in, how old the company is, legacy versus modern, and some things like IoT, they just don't make even software fixes for them. So like there even is no patch, which is a whole different problem that we can talk about.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
The amount of end-of-life
100%.
software out there is a little startling, certainly. And I think it's important to recognize that a lot of these organizations may not even have the internal resources to be able to pin down where the most critical patches are, as we mentioned earlier. So then it leads you to it leads you to wonder if it's just better to migrate or rebuild altogether in certain scenarios, or if it's just better to have, a very stringent compensating controls around these systems. I think that's often kind of the solution to those types of scenarios is very strict segmentation, very strict controls around the specific system so that even though it is vulnerable, it may be very, very difficult to exploit. So, depending on the positioning of your organization, you might have to take a very unique approach. And oftentimes that's the conversation we have to have from a compliance perspective when you're trying to get compliant is, why are these systems still vulnerable? And you're having to provide, a whole kind of all this documentation as to what controls are in place to, have that acceptable level of risk in your environments, right?
So let me ask you guys a question. Do you think like people move to SaaS to mitigate some of this risk of having to patch and make it somebody else's problem?
I think that's part of it. Certainly. There's other things to be said about the responsibility model there, but in doing so, you're absolutely moving the responsibility of the of patching that software to the vendor. Unless, of course, depending on the service level, that if you're in control of that, but
sure.
Often is the case, especially with pure play SaaS, that you're not. So it can be very much a viable solution for some organizations, for sure. You just have to remember the data management controls and the user access controls. Yeah,
different problems.
Yeah, 100%. Yep, different problems.
So Derek, we're going to talk, I know, in a little bit about, like, I'm going to highlight something from the National Cybersecurity Alliance, some of their points in and around software updating. One of those is to get it from the source, right? So I think that I'm safe in saying that in any cyber nerd or security nerd's vocabulary, or IT nerd for that matter, in their vocabulary is Patch Tuesday.
Yep.
And so Patch Tuesday, I think, as we all know, are the patches that come out from Microsoft every Tuesday. And my question for you, as a former tactician, and hands at the keyboard, why do those patches not get applied Tuesday night? Because quite often, in my circles, and I ask that question, typically they happen about a week later, maybe the following Monday. What's happening between the release of the patches and the actual implementation or the updating?
Yeah, I think a couple things, right? One is people want to make sure that the patch is like the patch, and there's not going to be like a version 2A or 2B. I've seen some issues where like they release a patch, and it's like, oh, hey, we missed a little bit of QA and it broke something way worse. So they want to wait just a little bit of time. Obviously, in some cases, if it's critical, you should patch kind of immediately, but there's a little bit of risk there. Secondly, sometimes it takes time to roll these patches out, right? Sometimes people want to automate them, or you want to play with them like in a lab QA zone to make sure that it's not going to break anything. Some customers have literally hundreds of apps running on their computers and servers, and one patch over here can kind of cause a chain reaction snowball. So QA testing becomes like a really big deal. So there's the bad approach in my opinion of just saying like auto update, leave it to chance, and good luck, right? It doesn't really work anymore in today's world, in my opinion. So
I got a question. What is your kind of thoughts on manual versus autonomous patching, right? And when is one more viable than the other, especially in enterprise environments?
Yeah,
I think on a personal level, oftentimes manually patching is the better solution. But at an enterprise level, when do we prefer one over the other?
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like you have to have a kind of a combination of both, right? Meaning almost like manually testing in your QA zone to make sure that the patches are going to work, everything's tested, everything's good, before you just kind of blast things out in an automated fashion. Because sometimes these tools can like destroy a network. I've seen them like just hog like all the bandwidth and go kind of nuts from that perspective. So it can be very difficult. So I would say, a good rule of thumb is, really understanding your environment to begin with. If the patches are kind of trusted and like, they're low risk, you want to automate maybe in chunks or batches, not just kind of turn it on and roll it out and pray for the upgrade to work. Even on the networking side too, or infrastructure side, same thing. Like you can automate a lot of these systems to do updates on certain hours or certain time zones, and maybe you don't want to take down your entire infrastructure at once. You want to do it in batches or phases. So I would say it's automation with heavy manual oversight, and just visibility and protection there. So it's always a mix of both, kind of almost in your world, right? Like, would you ever trust a tool to be 100% for pen testing? Probably not. You're going to use a trust but verify approach. Same thing for patching, in my opinion.
Excellent points. Yeah, that definitely answers my question.
That makes perfect sense.
So Sammy, I want to kind of maybe flip it a little bit to you. So, from your perspective, when you're out there doing your thing, how do you kind of determine that something is outdated, something isn't patched? What should you patch first? What does that kind of look like from a, gray hat perspective, if you will?
Yeah. So in terms of detection, to your point, there's a lot of ways that we could do this automatically with scanning devices, and there's ways we could do it manually. But really, it's all about grabbing banners, identifying what version levels are there, and then comparing that against commonly known vulnerability databases to understand what vulnerabilities are associated with the application or system. And oftentimes, to your earlier point, automation fails, or just really is kind of unreliable and may return an incorrect patch level. It may not even return it as vulnerable. So there's a highly manually driven kind of process to validate that what we're receiving is in fact correct. And so to your point about what we decide to patch, how do we prioritize risk? We really look at the different criteria that impact an organization and qualify risk there. So if the vulnerability has publicly available exploits already available and can be easily exploited by low-skill actors, that would automatically increase the priority of said patch, right, or said vulnerability. Likewise, if this is something that has been outdated for a long period of time, perhaps across many systems, this is an indicator that this should be prioritized as a vulnerability. And prioritization, I think, is really the name of the game when it comes to patching in general. Because of everything that we've talked about in terms of dependencies and the potential misuse of automation, having a subset of critical systems and then being able to triage certain patches or vulnerabilities within those systems is really how you're going to tackle your kind of approach in any kind of remediation program or any vulnerability management program. So, exploitability, impact, velocity, ease of exploitation. That's exploitability, but I digress. These are the kinds of things that we'd be really looking for when we come to. Repeating myself over here a little bit.
No, you're doing great. I love it.
Yeah.
I think you bring up a good point though, because you might do a scan and you might find a system that says, hey, I have a CVE 9 point whatever, and it's for this specific application. But when you break it down, you're like, oh, well, this box sits behind 4 layers of DMZ. It has 2 ports open. This thing isn't relevant. Therefore, it's critical and kind of on one side, but when you break down the real criticality, it's much lower. So I think kind of having that intelligence is also very key in a risk patch management, vulnerability management system there.
And I think we could file that, Derek, under risk acceptance, right?
Right.
Like in that specific scenario. One thing I was wondering, now that we put the gray hat kind of in the crosshairs of this conversation, what about, so I think Oracle just yesterday released a slew of patches across their portfolio, and I see it, because I'm constantly culling headlines and cyber attack news and whatnot. But is there a chicken and egg situation ever in that scenario where you want your customers and your users to know that there is an update, but if I'm not even a gray hat, if I'm a cyber actor and I see that, maybe that's going to refocus my attention to Oracle devices, right? Is that a mindset that you would look at, Sammy, when you're looking to kind of target or identify a target?
That is
and I can rephrase
an
if you need
question.
to.
No, that's actually an excellent question, and I think it's going to be an answer will come down to a matter of how it was discovered. If this was discovered, if these issues and bugs were discovered by internal or engineers or internal security engineers or white hats, then I would say it's better to inform, because the odds of a publicly available exploit or a proof of concept exploit, circling the industry is pretty low. However, if this was discovered as a result of a 0-day or actual real-world adversaries discovering and exploiting these things, that's kind of a different story, because you may not want to advertise that we are very vulnerable right now and anybody can exploit us, right?
Right.
Yeah.
No, exactly. And the reason I ask is I always envision kind of like the starter with the gun, before a race. And that alert, alert, patch is akin to firing the gun. And then who's going to get to the finish line first, right? Is the hacker going to find the system, target it, and successfully exploit? Or is the system owner going to be able to get that alert and test and implement whatever they have to do? Derek, you described all the steps, but get that patch, get that system patched, right? What happens first? And I always think about that, and it's you almost want like a whisper net, that only white hats are logged into, and only white hats can hear the alert go out, to patch systems. But that's something I've always thought about, because I've never been that guy with the hands on the keyboard doing the patching like you have, Derek, and you, Sammy. So
I'll give you a good example. I think this might answer the question pretty well to kind of echo what Sammy said. Let's look at earlier, this year and even last year with Microsoft Exchange. There's a lot of 0 days around this, so much so that your old friends at the FBI were actually going around and, logging in, I'll use that term, and actually helping patch some of the systems and, lock things down. Because that was a scenario where it got kind of, released. There was proof of concept out there. It was in the wild for a while. And to Sammy's point, it was kind of the opposite. So meaning it was well known from a threat actor perspective, and it just ran like wildfire. I mean, like us personally, we saw a lot of customers kind of get, after this and, kind of target to this as well. So like I said, it depends on whose side of the coin you get to first, but it also shows that the importance of patching. And I also want to kind of bring up that, and Sammy can probably echo this more than I can, but even when we're in there and you'd expect that that a patch had been around for say 5+ years, we still find examples of that patch not being applied, which is also scary because to me, it tells me, I can give you a patch tomorrow, but if it takes you 5 years to install it, that's another big problem too. So people don't always like patch, or they don't want to patch right away in itself.
Yep. Good.
Great point.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. The other thing too, it's like, let's kind of like maybe kind of break it down from the personal side now. So John, if I ask you, when was the last time you patched your Alexa or your smart TV or your printer or your AC at your house? What are you going to tell me?
Oh, well, I would just say, Derek, it's whenever my automatic update has done its thing, right? And so to your point, right, to our point earlier, that's probably an effective technique for the home, for the home user. But I think at the enterprise level, that would probably be not a good answer, right? Am I hearing this conversation and translating correctly?
Yeah. I think also just kind of, things to keep in mind, people out there. It's like, there's a lot of, connected devices at your house now, right? Like your thermostat, your refrigerator, your toaster, your vacuum cleaner, like everything, right? So these are also things that to be mindful of, right?
Exactly. Well, so let's rewind. And now that I know what you're focused on with the question, I don't know.
Right.
And I don't think they have been. Don't. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so like when you're talking about like at the personal level, one of CISA's fellow partners, the National Cybersecurity Alliance, right, NCA, also heavily engaged in Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and they're following the same theme, MFA, strong passwords, phishing, and software updating. And so around software updating, their advice, right, they provided 4 tips or guidance, for the home user, for the individual. Update often, right? In other words, update when it's available, and test it, of course, but don't wait. Get it from the source. I think that's hopefully obvious. Right, to the end user. In other words, if you see a thumb drive in the parking lot labeled Chrome update, just try to take a few steps back and don't touch it.
Chances are low.
Chances are very low that's going to be an effective update. Not a good patch. Typically make it automatic.
Update.exe doesn't work.
No.
Update.exe.
Bad.
Okay.
That's a bad Derek. Make it automatic. That's again, like I just answered your question.
Home use, totally agree.
Home use, automatic. That way we don't have to be reliant upon our sometimes human inability to be manual. And then lastly, watch for fakes. A couple podcasts ago, we were talking about, forget why, but we were talking about my mom and what a threat she is to all the computers in her ecosystem. But when I see watch for fakes, I'm like, why are we talking about John's mom again? And by this, I mean the pop-ups, right? Where don't fall for the pop-ups that come up in your browser or in your operating system asking you or telling you that you have to update such and such software. It's going to come from the maker of the software. It's not going to be in a pop-up, right? Typically.
Yeah.
So again, more talking points for mom.
Out there.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, I mean they all kind of work through that and carry on through. So I think those tips are very good about the home use, and same thing, right? There's no harm in kind of running through it, because sometimes vulnerabilities do hit like home routers, home devices,
absolutely
IoT things. So just do it.
And I think any conversation around cybersecurity should hit all fronts, both the workplace and the home front. And I think that's what compels all of our audiences to listen when we speak about security and about cyber. That's what I always lean on. I always have. Like there is nobody that should not be listening to this because you all have computers in your ecosystem and they all need updating.
It's true.
So, yep.
Phones too. Don't forget those. But yes, same thing.
Exactly.
And that's
same
particularly true when you consider how many people access, their work information through their personal devices, right? And how, nowadays those controls are
100%.
weak. So, they're basically using that as a means to bypass enterprise controls, right?
Yep.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep. Very important. Yep. Very important point there, Sammy. And phone updates don't just give you new emojis; they give you a lot of security.
They do. Yeah.
Right. Emojis are good, but security's better. Yeah, sometimes.
Every once in a while. That's why you wait like those couple days to let somebody else try it first. But yeah, same.
Yep.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, I think we covered quite a bit today on one of our ongoing favorite topics, and patching, vulnerability management, keeping things up to date, and why it's so important. So I don't know, any kind of closing thoughts you guys want to walk us out with?
Yeah,
besides patch. Perfect.
Yeah.
That's all we need. Just patch it.
Throw away your Alexa or your Nest. Just throw it away.
Yeah.
That's my tip.
Get rid of old systems you can't patch, and then patch often. How about that?
Yep. Yeah. There you go. I'll echo
awesome.
That. Thank you, Derek.
All right, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Be sure to like, subscribe, follow, comment. Looking forward to the next one, and take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Stay safe
Bye,
in
guys.
cyberspace.